You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things.
Welcome to Curiosity Invited, everybody. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jeff Schoep. I've said that right? It's one of those names, S-C-H-O-E-P, Schoep.
Yep.
Not like it's spelled. So thank you so much for doing this, and appreciate it. Where are you? You're in Detroit. Are you at home in Detroit?
Yeah, I'm in Detroit. Thanks for having me on the program, David. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor. It depends. So I should say something about who you are. And Jeff Schoep's name is familiar to people, if at all, because he was for 25 years the head, I don't know if the director of the National Socialist Movement. The National Socialist Movement I believe it still exists, is a spin-off or a product of the American Nazi Party. And so Jeff was a member of the organization, I believe, for 27 years, and the leader of it for 25 of those 27 years. And he has, in the last several years, and we'll hear about that story, spent virtually all of his professional time trying to undo his affiliations, undo the damage if there was damage done by what he did, and essentially, well, I'm going to let you explain what it is you're doing now. And but I think the question that's burning for me really before we even start that is about forgiveness. And I mean that in terms of forgiveness, forgive yourself and other people forgiving you. So is that a struggle? I mean, was it a struggle? Is it a struggle for you to have come to the realization of what you were doing in the world and forgiving yourself for doing that?
It certainly was a struggle. I still struggle with the word forgiveness because a lot of times when I look back on my life and the things that I've was involved in and stuff, it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult word, I guess you could say, to contend with. I'd like to say that I've forgiven myself, and I think that the work I'm doing now speaks for itself and is redemptive and working towards reconciliation and all of those things. So I think that's important as well. But I struggle with that word because there's a lot of there's people out there in the world that I've met countless people. I couldn't even give you a number that have said, that they've forgiven me. And I've apologized to some of the people that I was nasty to in my previous, I like to say previous life. It was the same life, but
yes, right.
Yes. Yeah. I like to look at it as if it was somebody else, but so I've made a lot of positive strides in that. One of my friends, an African American man, he told me, and he was at one of my talks, and he said, he grabs me afterwards, when there was no one there, and he says, "You better not ever say that you don't forgive yourself, Jeff. That's going to hold you back. You're doing good things. Don't struggle with that." But I try to remember that when people ask, because it is a it's tough. It's tough,
yeah.
Like I take ownership for what I've done in my past, and I think that's an important part towards that. But not everybody can forgive, and I understand that too.
Yeah. So at first I was thinking in terms of, well, have other people forgiven you? And then I thought, well, even bigger than that. I mean, you're the one who's more than anybody else, you are living with you. And so there's that, that's a big one, forgiving yourself somehow, or whatever forgiving means, reckoning with your past in a way that is honest and genuine and real. So I'm not sure what my feelings are. I'm a Jewish man, and whether Jews or people from Latino people, Latinx people, Black people, what do you say to them about who you were?
I'm just honest about it, and that's one of the things in like the talks and things that I do now, and in the work that I do now. I was really struggling with, how do I, show people, or how do I discuss with people about my past without traumatizing them or causing fear or things like that. So I've been very careful, and I still do it to this day. Once in a while, I'll ask
what's holding us back, then we had to get rid of it.
Our first speaker is Commander Jeff Scoop, the National Socialist Movement.
Brothers and sisters, a new era has dawned. National Socialist plan and white nationalists stand together here. Unity, solidarity. No longer will this struggle be divided through infighting. Hail victory! Hail victory!
It's not about the uniform you wear, the colors you fly. It is about the color of our skin. Stronger than ever, we are rising. They cannot stop us. This is just the beginning. This is the start of the revolution for our people.
Going back to forgiveness, speaking at synagogues or to the Jewish community or other community, the Jewish community is the community I vilified the most when I was involved in that. Yes, absolutely. And I don't feel like I have the right to ask for forgiveness. And this is another reason why I struggle with that term, because I don't feel I have that right. And I know when I first spoke the first time I spoke at a synagogue, afterwards, and the congregation were coming up to me and they were like, we forgive you. And it was really heartfelt and meaningful. I just didn't feel like I had, because someone asked about that too. And I said, I don't feel like I have the right to ask, to ask for it.
And I kind of want to, maybe I should wait for this, but I'm assuming that there are a bunch of people out there who don't have it in them or don't think it's a good idea to trust you. I mean, I think, do you run into people who just don't trust that you've made some sort of transformation?
Well, sure. There's always going to be people that are skeptics, and I've had this conversation with other former extremists that have left too, and they said, the longer that you're away from that life, the longer you're away from it, the less that starts to happen. And I've already noticed that to some degree, because I've had skeptics and things like that at first, and I try to put myself in their shoes, and I understand it. I was involved for a very long time. I was very high profile. And there will always be skeptics. At this point, I feel like, when I get asked that question, I don't get upset about it. I try to put myself in the shoes of people looking at it from the outside looking in. If I looked at it from just my perspective, then I'd be upset all the time. That's not helpful. So I try to put myself in their shoes and understand it, and looking from the outside in, the best way I guess I can answer that is by saying, through actions and deeds, but I was on the top when I left, and when I left, it caused a lot of complications and a lot of issues and a lot of problems for me, and starting over at life, my business was involved in this stuff, and again, I'm not saying this for sympathy, but I'm saying it for context, to explain to any individuals that are out there that may still be questioning me, that I gave up everything. I gave up my career. I gave up my business that I had built. Everything, my whole life was involved in this stuff. When I came to the conclusion that I was doing the wrong thing, I couldn't reconcile with that. I couldn't. It would have been easier to stay on board and just go through the motions and pretend, but as a man, I can't do that. If I don't believe in something, I can't fight for it. So I couldn't stay any longer. I stayed longer, a couple years longer than I should have.
You don't have a lot of friends in that situation.
That's not true. I mean, that's not.
Well, I mean, you got those people hating you for this, for what you did, and those people hating you for what you're doing now.
Yeah. It's a lot. I think a lot of times when people make those judgments and when they talk about those things or think about those things, they don't think about all that. And why should they? It's not them. It's not their life.
Right.
So I try to take it all into context and just say like, hey, look, all I can do is, I could do anything else. I know business. I have leadership skills, these different things that I could do, but instead I'm putting myself out there at risk to try to do this work, to try to make a difference, to try to reverse some of the negative things that I'd done in the past, and also because I feel like I can make a difference here, and I have been.
We talk a little bit before we talk about just for background about the National Socialist Movement. What are you doing now? I know you've got an organization that you started that to try to undo. It's almost like the opposite of. But can you talk some about that?
So I started Beyond Barriers. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and the idea behind that, aside from peace building, and it was extremist disengagement and de-radicalization. So a lot of people were reaching out when I first put out just my personal website, and they were curious, like, what happened? Why did you leave? And now there's an opportunity for conversations. Oh, other people were trying to leave, and I helped a lot of people leave, and I still help a lot of people leave, from all different sorts of extremism. That's one of the things we do. So it's not about, for me, it's not about the personal motivation. It's not about saving that one guy, that one lady, 10, 15 people, 20 people here, there. It's not about them, but it's about if we off ramp the next mass shooter, if we off ramp the next, person that's going to walk into a synagogue or a mosque or a church or something of that nature, how many innocent lives are we potentially saving? That's the big picture. That's the way I look at it. I mean, of course, we want to help each individual that reaches out, and we do the best we can with it. And we've helped a lot of people.
But when you say you help someone leave, what does that actually mean? What does that entail? You mean you talk them through it? You mean they're struggling with the question of what will happen? What does that actually look like? Helping someone leave.
So a lot of times it has to do with listening. It has to do with dialogue. It has to do with, and it also has to do with reframing of questions and the way people look at things, and getting them to challenge themselves so they're able to walk through it. So we it's a lot of talking and a lot of listening and a lot of, reassuring people.
It just occurred to me as you were speaking as something people want to get out. Why don't they just not show up anymore? Like, why don't they just don't come to meetings? You want out? So just get out, go. Well, why is that? Or is that? Is there really a compulsion? Like you have to do this, or there's a consequence?
It depends on the organization. That's a good question, because I didn't really explain that either. And it really depends on the group. Some of the groups that you're involved in, and I can say in the group I was involved in, people would come and go all the time. Membership was like a revolving door there, because it was what you call an above ground organization, an organization that was functioning within the laws of the United States. If people were out breaking serious laws, they could get thrown out of the organization. But depends on, you've got some of the other groups that function like gangs almost, your prison gang types, a lot of those, you can't just walk away, they'll come for you. So it really depends, it really depends on the particular extremist group that one's involved in. So a lot of it is psychological in other ways. And it also depends on the group. So, we cover all those different aspects of it. And during my time when I was involved in this stuff, I spoke at a lot of different functions, not just for the NSM, but across the gamut as far as the different organizations. So I'm pretty familiar with most of them and how most of them operate. I did, but it does still exist. But what the organization was or is basically, as you said, is America's Nazi Party. It was a continuation of the movement of George Lincoln Rockwell.
Right.
It was started by and he was the original founder of the American Nazi Party back in the 1950s. The organization itself was started in 1973 by men that served with Rockwell, and I was mentored by one of them when I first joined the organization. That's who appointed me to run it. So
and you joined the organization when you were, I mean, a kid, essentially, like 18, 19. Yeah. How did it come to be that Jeff Scoop, you know, nice boy growing up in, where'd you grow up? Midwest? Rural Minnesota. Nice boy growing up in rural Minnesota. You know, I don't know what your home life was, but suddenly he's drifting into Nazis, right? And I'm like, how did this happen? You have some insight into that?
Yeah. So, first taking over the organization at that point was very challenging, especially when with older members, like having somebody that young.
You're a kid.
Running the group. Yeah, it was unheard of. Like it was not, especially for such an old organization. It was absolutely unheard of, and there was a lot of challenges. Just on a perspective level during that time, that there was guys that were like, I am not why should I have to listen to a young kid? What does he know? I've been in this group 20 years or whatever. Yeah. And why was I passed up? So there was some of that. So I had I learned a lot in the couple of years that I worked under the former leader, but I had to learn a lot as I went, and a lot of mistakes were made, and a lot of rules were put into place over the years, and a whole structure was built for the organization to maintain that, because you have to maintain discipline, you have to maintain order. It was a whole structure was set up. It was put into a corporation. It was there was a lot of things it was run like a business, and eventually it started becoming run like a business, but also like I hate to say it, like almost like a paramilitary type of situation. It wasn't a democracy. It was a dictatorship. There was
a chain of command, etc.
Yes. But how I got in, David, is everybody has a different story or a different reason. Sure. And we can talk about that as well. But my reason was a little bit more unique or different. And it's not completely rare, because there's others that go in for this reason as well. But it's not one of the most common reasons, at least here in the U.S. anyways. So for me, it was my fascination. I come from a good home. My parents worked hard, and
what they do? What did your folks do? What'd your dad, what was his job? What is his work?
So my father ran a manufacturing company. They would make hunting clothes and things of that nature. And he ran that. Yeah. And my mother was originally, she was a school teacher, and she taught German. My family's from Germany. My mom's side of the family is all from Germany. Mm-hmm. And then she became a lawyer. So that was, they worked hard. Yeah. So my trajectory into the movement, though, was because of I skipped a little part here, but my grandfather fought in Hitler's army in World War II, and my great uncles did as well. But it was that fascination with my grandfather as a child growing up, that as young as fourth grade, I was in the elementary school library checking out World War II books that were covered in dust nobody had checked out since.
Yeah, maybe ever.
Years and years and years, like they were in this. I still remember sitting like in this little corner in the library and pulling these books off of this bottom shelf where you had to like crouch down to get to it. And nobody was reading those books. They hadn't been checked out since some of them since the 60s or something. They're really old. So it was a little strange. But so my fascination was that historical connection, and that's the same reason why I joined the NSM, is because it had that historical connection back to Rockwell, which was the which was something that I was looking for. So I wasn't taught to hate or anything like that growing up. That came later.
And do you have any insight into like why you weren't repelled by it rather than drawn to it? Not, yeah, your grandfather grew up in a certain place, and probably a lot of people went into you had to, right? So you went into the service, you went into the army because it was, and there was pressure to do that.
Yep.
But there wasn't pressure for you to do it. So what, do you have any idea about like, what about that? You ask yourself that question. I mean, I don't know, I'm not challenging you like you have to, but it's curious to me that that a young kid would read about what the Nazis wanted and say, yeah, that's for me. I don't get it. Do you get it?
A lot of people don't get it. No, I hear you. I understand. But it was this, I want to say like this false sense of reality in a way. One thing that we said in the movement a lot, and I used to say too, is like in history, it is the victors that write the history, in the wars and things like that. So later on, I felt this draw to the movement. It didn't have anything to do with hate or racism, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
Of course it is. We all know that, but that wasn't the entry point for me. And to be honest, and we can talk about this too, but it's not the entry point for most people that go into these movements. It's something that's learned and taught there, but that's a whole nother conversation or another part. But for me, it was that fascination. It was it just looked like I guess if you could break it down at that age and put myself back in really young Jeff's shoes, it was like, wow, this is cool. Like as a kid, you think it looks cool, it looks powerful, the uniforms, the discipline, all this kind of stuff. It has an appeal in that sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some ways, many ways, obviously there's a slice of the population of young kids who are drawn to the military here, right? I mean, there's something about the order. You get to use guns. That's kind of cool. You get to be good at all sorts of things. The young men, young boys are always growing up. Maybe young people generally are growing up wanting to feel more powerful because we are as kids relatively powerless. And so I get that piece. I'm just, I guess I'm the question mark that's sort of floating in the bubble above my head is the as you learn what it is, why isn't it this? No way. Versus this. That's the piece. That's puzzle. It's probably a puzzle for you too.
No, I know what it is now. It's confirmation. It's confirmation bias is what it is. It's confirmation bias. And I always understood the concept of it, but I didn't know there was a term for it until I've been starting to, do the work I do now. But it's confirmation bias 100%. So you can have two sets of what you would see as facts, what the individual would see as facts. But really only one set is the facts, but the other is it fits your narrative. And we see this in a lot of aspects of society now, where people want something to fit to their narrative. And this is what with confirmation bias is what it does. So you have the real history here, like for example, in my case with World War II, and you have revisionist history over here on the other hand. And, when you start becoming radicalized and you start filling into these concepts, then all you want to believe is what fits your narrative. It's what fits that. So the Holocaust revisionism and all that fit the narrative for me. And I just took it hook, line, and sinker, and then just started wanting to read everything I could on it. And I felt like much like a cult, you feel like you have this new truth that you're learning about this stuff, and it's all right there, and they're giving you references, and now this new truth, and you need to go out and spread the word. And I think another part of it is in life, for a lot of people, having a mission is really important. Being greater than you are, having something fulfilling what you do. And this is something a lot of people struggle with coming out of the movement too, is finding that new mission.
Right.
I have a new mission, so it's not for me, the new mission is much better. And it's actually doing something good. Instead of thinking I was doing something good, it's actually doing something good for society and all that. So that's something that we try to find for a lot of people. Not everybody wants to do this, or not everybody can do it. And it's a lot of, it's not easy, but,
oh my God. I mean, to look at all the people who retire and they're like miserable, right? Like,
yeah. Yes.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Now
That's
what?
just it.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so there you are. You're going along. The organization is growing. And did you have a family throughout this process? Like, a wife and kids, or whatever that is. However that.
Yeah.
You did. And were they involved in the movement, or no? This was dad's going off to a meeting.
Yeah. How do I explain this? So the children never got involved in the movement, which was good. And I'm so thankful for that. They knew what I was doing, they knew I was involved and all that, but it wasn't shoved down their throats or anything like that. But it was, they knew what I was involved in, unfortunately. But I think and this is something that I had to ask myself too after leaving, because a lot of people were in the movement. Some would, really work hard to bring their children involved and get them involved, and others would wait and let them make their own choices. And my thing was like, mine can wait until they're 18 and make their own choices. But I still wanted to discourage it, because every parent, I believe, wants a better life for their children than what they had. And I know some of the things that I had went through in those years that I was involved. Everything from attempts on my life to the different violence and things that took place. I didn't want that for my kids.
Mm-hmm. So. And did that come to pass, or were they drawn into it eventually, or no? Not at all.
None.
Yeah. And are they in your life now?
Yeah.
That's great. And was there a time when they weren't because of the activities, or no? They were always your kids. It was a family. Yeah. It
does cause being involved in extremism causes incredible damage to the family units in a lot of cases. And I didn't share this yet with you, but how it damaged my mom's career permanently. She was elected in the state of Minnesota to be a judge, which was her dream. And there was
your involvement in the NSM damaged her career.
Big time. And originally, when I first started speaking out, I didn't want to talk about this because it was so stressful, I guess you could say. And it is painful, as my mom's passed on now, and thinking about it, it was a very difficult time, but how it was explained to me. And I think I've been told, colleagues and friends will say, I think it's important. People should hear this, because I always think I'd rather talk about other people's situations than my own. It's always tough to talk about your own, but I think it's important for context and for people to kind of understand, like, hate and being involved in this stuff doesn't just damage civil society and the people that it's targeting it, but it also damages the people that are in it and the families of the people that are in it. And this is one really good example of that in particular. And the way it was explained to me, there was a formality in the judgeships in Minnesota. So she was elected. She was elected. Yes. And the formality was that the governor, and this is it differs in every state, and I don't know if it's changed. I have no idea, but this is how my mother explained it to me back then. So the governor signs off on all the new judges. It's basically a formality in the state. And he calls my mother up and says, "Mrs. Scoop, Your son is leading the Nazi party. Your father fought in the German army during World War II. We do not feel you are fit to be a judge in this state. My mother was like a liberal, not far left, but a liberal Democrat. And so she had nothing to do with anything that I stood for. And it destroyed her. That was her dream. So she was robbed of her dream because of my involvement. And a lot of people would say, well, wouldn't that have made you think twice? Like, wouldn't that have driven you right out of the movement? No, it did the exact opposite.
I was about to say, I mean, there's a way in which you could, almost the opposite is like, well, you see, this is what we're fighting against. How could they do this to somebody like that? Did your mom, for lack of a better way of putting it, but like, did she hold a grudge? Was she pissed off at you? Or she was obviously pissed off at them, but was she pissed off at you?
Yes. I mean, I was really close to my mother and we remained close, but when that happened, there was a period of time, and I don't remember how long it was. It felt like a couple of years.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't, but it felt like a couple of years where she would not hardly talk to me, because she felt it was my fault. I feel like the right thing that the governor should have signed it, because she had nothing to do with what I was doing or anything like that. But on the flip side,
well, there's a way in which that's a small example and almost a shadow of how things have evolved since, right? So I don't mean with you. I mean, so somebody does something that pisses one side or another off, and now it mobilizes everyone to, whether it's canceling or firing or whatever, and that splatters on the family, on the kids, and it's always terrible, and at least to my mind, never justified. It becomes it's like a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah,
right? It's like suddenly the punishment is not visited on the target, but instead everything. So it's like the terrorism of everyday life. So,
very, very well stated. The thing it reminds me of is when you hear about people trying to escape North Korea. Now, this is an extreme example, but when someone tries to escape North Korea, and then you hear about, well, they're going to go after their whole family's in a camp now, and they might not even have known.
Okay, so there you are, and being successful at it in ways that the organization has never been successful before, and 25 years now, it's like, what happened? What happened to you? Like, well, all of a sudden you're thinking about it. So can you talk about and I know some of you made reference to some of the people you met along the way, but would you be willing to talk some about like what that change, what brought it about? How did you participate in it? How did other people participate in it? So like that. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm being long-winded here.
No, it's okay. It wasn't a snap of a fingers overnight decision, and I have some of those stories of other people, but in my case, it took longer. And for some people, it takes years and years and years. Some people, it's a snap of a finger. It's one act of kindness or compassion. For me, it was acts of kindness and compassion as well, but it took time. Like I kept trying to, and much like being in a cult, you just keep trying to justify it. You keep trying to, fit your narrative, or like with that confirmation bias I was talking about earlier. But what it was that, there was a lot of things that played a role in my disengagement and de-radicalization process. And so what was happening was I'm meeting different people. First, I had moved to Detroit. I started meeting white people are the minority here. and I'm meeting people from all different walks of life, and I'm starting to see the humanity in people that I wasn't seeing before, because when you're in these groups, you're behind the barriers, or you're in an echo chamber, you isolate, and that's your world. Again, much like a cult. But
you were still in the group, right? You're still
in the group. Yeah.
You're still running the show.
Yep. So I'm still trying, and now I've around 2016 or around this time, I'm starting to say, no, look, we're calling this a white civil rights organization. So, and I call this putting lipstick on a pig, because I was trying to dress up the Nazi party. But in my mind, looking at it now, it's like laughable and ridiculous and stupid. But at the time, it made total sense. It was like, oh, this isn't a hate group. I convinced myself it wasn't a hate group. I know the listening audience is rolling and, going, oh my God, this guy's, this is nuts. But in my mind, I convinced myself of that it wasn't, and that I was doing something good and noble and all these things. So I'm making some changes in the group, don't use racial epithets, don't, this and that, making changes. Eventually got rid of the swastika from public use in around 2016. But I want to say the biggest seeds of change that were planted, it started with Daryl Davis and then Dia Khan, and I can explain that further if you like.
Please, yeah.
So Daryl Davis, just for context, for those that don't know him, he's an African-American musician. He played with Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis Presley. He's very well known. He sets the piano keys on fire. Incredible musician. What he does, yeah, he's just phenomenal. Anybody gets a chance to see him, please do. He's phenomenal. But what else he does is he helps get people out of these type of organizations. Well, I had gotten a phone call from Daryl's producer for his film Accidental Courtesy. I didn't even know I was meeting Daryl Davis, and this, so I'm in my role as the leader of the NSM. I'm in History Channel stuff, National Geographic, whatever. I'm interviewing with people in documentaries all the time. It was part of the role, nothing new. But typically, I would look into whoever I was meeting, the background, all this kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was fate or carelessness, whatever you want to call it. I want to say it's fate, but because I always, for security purposes and everything else, like dug into the backgrounds of people that I was meeting with back then. And I didn't do that this time. I just said, sure, I'll be in the film. Sounds interesting. I'll be in it. Where do I need to be? So I didn't know I was meeting with Daryl Davis. I'm sitting outside with my girl on the bench outside this place where we were supposed to meet, and this big black man comes up to me. You must be Jeff Scoop. Who are you? And that was the beginning of meeting Daryl Davis. And what I found, and then after I started talking to him, I was like, oh, this is that guy that gets Klan people out. This should be interesting. I'll show him is what I was thinking. And I didn't realize that, I would make a friend and a brother for life during that was our first meeting. And so we're filming, we're talking, and how he could relate and how perceptive he was and how intelligent he was, all these things. And we had all these things in common, like with music and background and all this kind of stuff. So I thought, this is somebody that I would like hang out with. This is, but I can't, because I'm the head of the movement. I'm not supposed to like this guy, and what he had said to me that really got to me in that conversation was he told me about how racism and hate affected him as a child, what sent him on the journey. That's a good
story, right?
It. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. He talked about it, that, being 10 years old and at the Boy Scout parade or Cub Scout parade or whatever it was, and getting pelted, being the only black kid there and not understanding why anybody was upset. Like what? Yeah. And hearing from his parents that, the story of what racism is, and actually not believing it because it was so not a part of his experience in any way. Really quite powerful.
And him sharing that and sitting across from me and sharing how that affected him. And he's not showing emotion because Daryl's a strong guy. He's a tough guy. So he's not showing it, but I'm reflecting as I'm hearing this story, and I'm thinking, in the movement, we always said family, race, and nation. We always were saying these things. And I was like, if this ideology, let me put it that way, if this ideology is affecting this individual, that I'm sitting across from in this manner, how many other people across the world has it affected in that way or worse? And what if I'm trying to put myself in his shoes to understand his story and thinking, what if somebody would have done that to one of my children? That's where my mind went. So I'm thinking about that, and it's like, there was so many disconnects. When you would hear things like that, you would always say like, oh, you kind of dismiss it and say like, oh, maybe it was just a crazy person that did that. We did the same thing. I did the same thing too. Every time there was a mass shooter or something like that. And you go, the guy must've went crazy. Instead of thinking, maybe this ideology is driving people to do this. We would just dismiss it as, well, that person went nuts. They went crazy. But it's if it happened once, twice, you could make sense of that. But when it's happening again and again and again and again, no, there's something wrong with the ideology. And it took me way too long to figure that out. But soon after meeting Daryl, I had met another filmmaker, a Muslim lady by the name of Dia Khan, and I'd gotten to know, I was one of the main characters in her film, White Right Meeting the Enemy. I'd gotten to know her quite well, and she's like family now as well. But she really got to me in the sense of sharing a story similar to Daryl's. And she said, I'm sitting across from her, and she says, Jeff, the movement that you were a part of, ideology that you stand for, made a little girl feel less than, ugly, hated, not worthy. And David, I tell you, I could not. The cameraman noticed it and everything and zoomed in on my eyes because I could not reconcile with that. That made me feel like garbage. And it wasn't just that. Like, I could see the pain in Dia's face, but I could feel it like an energy, like a vibe in the air, like it just hit me. And it felt like getting kicked in the chest by a horse. Made me feel like complete garbage. And I was like, okay. And then I started thinking about how it affected Daryl. And then I was like, I can't be involved in this anymore. I can't do this.
How long from those experiences were you able to somehow extract? Did it take you to sort of extract yourself from that? I mean, I recognize the extraction is in some ways, we're all extracting ourselves from our biases and bigotries and et cetera, hopefully, but how long before you really had to, because you couldn't stomach it anymore, make the move?
Longer than I'd like to admit. That was meeting her, I think, was in 2017. Mm-hmm. And it took, like I said, I left in the beginning of 2019. I was struggling with it for quite a while. And Dia was one of the only people I could count them on one hand. A couple of girlfriends, my dad, and Dia were about the only people that knew I was going to leave, that I was struggling with it. And I was like, I don't know. I kept making excuses in my mind, like, well, what am I going to do for, my business is involved in this, what am I going to do about this? There was corporate responsibilities. There was all these different things going on. Like, maybe I should stay, maybe I should go, and I was just struggling with it for way longer than I should have been. I should have just walked away in 2017.
Was there an element of being afraid for your life? Like, was there the possibility that you getting out would be, would piss enough people off so much that suddenly your life is in danger? Or
well,
that wasn't a pressing factor.
That wasn't really the pressing factor in that sense. I mean, yeah, there is risk involved in it and all that, sure. But if I would have just retired and just been done, just walked away and never looked back, the movement wouldn't not have coming after me or something like that.
From where you're sitting, is hate on the rise? Which direction is this going in? from where you're sitting as somebody who is so saturated in the movement and so familiar with it?
You know, I don't like to be alarmist, but I think the direction the country's, excuse me, I think the direction the country is going in right now is really not good. The polarization that we're experiencing and that we're seeing in civil society, even on the levels of like between the Democrats and Republicans, is horrific. It is something that is so the way we're seeing it now, and we all know these people in our social circles or sometimes in our families or people that we know, where they'll say, well, if you voted for Joe Biden, I'm not talking to you, or you voted for Donald Trump, I'm not talking to you. What is wrong? You know, I don't have any right to judge because I was a radical extremist myself, but it's like, what is wrong, people? Like, are you serious? Like, does it really matter that much who one voted for, that you're gonna cut these people off out of your family or out of your circle of friends? And this is super common right now, and we didn't have that before, and now we're having that now. So I don't blame Trump for it, and I don't blame Biden for it. I think a lot of us are playing a part in it. I think the media plays a part in it as well, but we're all like, not all of us, but a lot of people are in these echo chambers. And what's so dangerous about that is it's some of the first steps to radicalization, because if someone's talking like that, I'm not talking to you because you voted for Donald Trump or you voted for Joe Biden. That's somebody that's on the verge of stepping into radicalization, because now they're closed off, where they're not willing to listen to someone else's opinions. And they're not having dialogue, and they're trapped in that bubble. And as somebody that was behind those barriers or in one of those bubbles, I know how dangerous that is, and I know where it can lead. So it needs to stop.
Of the groups that you were involved in, are they on the rise? Are we seeing them, you know, sort of fading, or is it really more and more of what you walked away from?
It's difficult to gauge that at sometimes, because the way I can say from over the years, there's a lot of fluctuation with these groups, because they'll kind of go in waves, like up and down, and then it also depends on you know, what particular groups one's looking at as far as that's concerned. But I think the polarization in the country is getting worse. I don't know if like some of like the hardcore hate groups necessarily are growing. I think probably so, but we're not seeing as much of them in the streets right at this moment, but that could change at any given time. It really kind of depends. It's a tough question. It's a tough question to answer in that sense, because it's easy to say, yes, you know, hate groups are increasing in numbers and things like that. And but what I guess is more alarming to me is some of the you know, that's bad as it is, you know, when hate groups are growing. But what's the biggest concern, I think, is some of the violent rhetoric, some of the most extreme of the extreme on the extremes. Some of the people that are openly advocating killing and destruction and bringing down the government. And so a lot of the accelerationist aspect of the movement, the extreme of the extreme. And when I say that, you know, they say, well, wait a minute, you must have been the most extreme because you were in the Nazi party. No. And it's not even close. There's much more, unfortunately, there's much more extreme groups that, and they're some of these extreme far right groups, if you could even classify them as far right, they're sharing ISIS propaganda, beheading videos, ISIS cooking videos, which is bomb making in your kitchen, things like that. And there's crossing over of ideologies, and it's really disturbing.
You know, it's interesting what my conversation with Daryl Davis, you know, he, toward the end, he was pointing at, which I thought was really insightful, pointing at that more and more, many of the first of all, there are more organizations, you know, they fragment, they break off into splinter groups, et cetera, et cetera. They don't particularly necessarily get along with each other. And the thing that the groups have been speaking about for years, you know, this country, the browning of America, right? I mean, this country's becoming polluted, is it's actually demographically, it's true. More and more people from different places, different ethnicities are part of the population. And it's exactly what they fear. And it generates even, sort of more of the angst and I thought that was really an interesting, and terrifying insight.
The way I look at it is like people are here. And I'm talking about now, how I see it, not before, but before it was like this fear, like, oh my gosh, these different people of different races are going to take over the country and they're going to persecute us. So we need to uplift all of us together, not white people, not brown people, not black people, all of us together as humanity. That's the way to solve that. I mean, we don't want to keep vilifying. That's what the movement does. The movement vilifies the other races and other people, and it's just not good for humanity as a whole.
So if I was well versed, what would I be asking you that I'm not?
You've asked a lot of really good questions, David. There's so much to cover.
I think the piece that is, how does it come to pass? Sort of in the most granular way, how does it come to pass that a young person suddenly is an adult in that world? And then what is that process of extraction and transformation? And, I recognize that it's varied for so many different people. And it's a powerful thing. And I'm really, really grateful that you're doing the work you're doing now, and that you're no longer doing what you were doing, and that you're willing to speak about it and be honest about it and be upfront about it.
I guess I can say, everybody's trajectory into extremism is different. And for some, it's trauma. For some, it's a sense of belonging. For others, it's different things and life experiences. Because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling that nobody is talking to, and they don't have anybody, and you don't know what someone's going through. So it's easy to cast stones from afar or to judge people without knowing their story or their background and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to have conversations, to listen, to reciprocal conversations, to be able to hear and listen and add perspectives, and I think we just need more of that in society. And I think that's the silver lining. I think if and that anybody can change. If somebody like myself can change, and some of the people that we've worked with, there was one individual that was in the movement since the 1980s. And this is somebody I knew, actually, and he's out of the movement because of some tragedies that took place in his family. And it took that for him to see. And he says, my grandson will never be involved in the stuff we were involved in, Jeff, because of what it did to my family. I feel like anybody is capable of change. You just have to be able to do it here in your heart and work at it. And you can.
Well, Jeff, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm not sure I would have guessed that I would say that and genuinely feel that at the end of the conversation. But and so thank you for being willing to have this conversation. And I'm going to see if I can cash in another chip with Daryl, and if I have any, and see if we can make a conversation between the three of us happen. That'd be
awesome. Yeah, thank you.
You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.